All right, and then let me share my screen real quick. All right, and you guys can see the presentation all fine? Great. All right, let's see. I can move this thing out of the way. My screen. All right. All right, so I did just already introduce myself, but for anybody who's missed it, my name is Tiffany Kennedy. I work with Mother Compost. I'm the Director of Operations there since 2019, and I am passionate about all parts of the food cycle and excited to talk to you about home composting tonight. So tonight, what we're going to talk about is what composting is and why we do it, how to get started at your home, specifically what does go into your home compost pile or bin, the phases of composting, and then once you have a finished compost product, how to put it in your gardens and soils, and also diagnosing any issues that may come up along the way. So to start, I just always like to clarify the difference between composting and compost. These words are often interchanged, but they do have slight different meanings. So composting is a verb. It's the actual process of organic material decaying and being decomposed by microorganisms. And once they are done with that, it then turns into compost, which is the byproduct. It's a noun, which is our nutrient-rich soil amendment that can be used as a fertilizer and applied back to the ground. So composting is a natural process that has been happening forever. It's Mother Nature's natural thing. And when we humans compost, what we do is we end up creating an ideal environment for the microbes to do their thing. And so this has been being done forever. And a fun fact was that the Mesopotamian Akkadian Empire, so composting has been dated back all the way to 2334 BC as like a gardening practice. And I'm sure it was happening much before then, but that is just the first known recording of this. Sorry, let me put this on my pipe. All right, so why composting? So there's so many different reasons why we can compost, and maybe you're interested in composting for one reason or another, but these are the main reasons I think why people compost and why it's important. So one is to save and repurpose our resources. So we have this nutrient, this organic matter that we are just naturally creating, whether it's just from food waste or yard waste. And recycling that and creating new soil from it to then utilize and use on our lands. So we're recycling our resources there. And also we can save resources because if we're not sending our organic waste or food scraps to the landfill or incinerator, we are then not utilizing the energy and resources it takes to run those operations, from water usage, electricity usage, to just general labor. So taking our organics and composting them saves us resources and repurposes this material into something. And again, when we get that finished compost product, we can improve our soils. Compost increases soil structure, adds more nutrients into the soil. And so when we have healthier soil, we can grow healthier produce, and then we have healthier humans, is how I like to put it simply. Other reasons are to reduce our environmental impact. I mentioned about the landfills, and about 40%, 40 to 50%, studies kind of hover between those numbers, of residential waste that we send to the landfills or incinerator could be composted instead. So I have a nice graphic on the next slide that I'll show you in a second that kind of breaks that down, but about 40%. So if we were taking that out, we could be extending the life of landfills and reducing the impacts of incineration. And then also, when organics get sent to the landfills, they give off a byproduct of methane, which is a greenhouse gas you may know about. And that's because landfills are capped and compacted, so we're taking oxygen away from this material, so the chemical breakdown, it looks a little different, and that's why we give off methane, which aids to climate change. And then also we can reduce environmental impact by actually applying the compost to the land because it helps sequester carbon. So it takes carbon from the atmosphere and stores it then in the soil to help reverse the effects of climate change. So when we compost, we're not only sending less material to the landfills and incinerators that are giving off greenhouse gases, but we're also able to combat greenhouse gases into the soil. And then lastly, saving money. This is something that can be a benefit for people. If you're sending less things to the landfill, hopefully you could be paying less to compost it. However, depending on where you live, that may not be the case. And so, like I said, I have this graphic. It's from the Institute of Local Self-Reliance. And it just kind of shows about that 50% mark of things being thrown away municipally can be composted. A large portion of that, this says 21%. I think that number is now closer to 30% is food scraps alone. This data was from 2018, I believe. And then we've got paper and cardboard, yard trimmings, and wood waste. So lots of opportunity to be composting and diverting our waste. This is another graphic from the Institute of Local Self-Reliance, and this is showing more of the benefits of applying compost to the ground. So I talked about how it can take that carbon out of the atmosphere and store it in the soil. Other things it can do is filter out stormwater pollutants and act as a soil sponge. So compost can hold typically around 4 to 5 times its weight in water, which helps prevent erosion and desertification of the land. So lots of reasons we should be composting. I'm going to keep it high level there, and if you have more questions, you can ask me at the end or look more into this on your own. But there's so many reasons that we should be composting. And to get down to the actual composting process, I like to break it down into these 5 components. So when, again, us humans are composting, we're really just controlling the environment of the compost pile to help so that the microorganisms can thrive and do their decomposition. And so when we do that, we would need to look at these 5 things. So volume, temperature, air, moisture, and of course the microorganisms. So the reason volume is on there is because the more material we have, the warmer the pile or compost bin will become. So the more volume you have, it can increase the temperature, and our microorganisms like it hot. They do not like the winter. They do their best work at higher temperatures. So more volume equals higher temperature. And then just like us, microorganisms need air and moisture to survive. So we need to turn our piles and allow for airflow in. And again, that's kind of what the difference here is between composting and then sending things to landfill. People often ask like, oh, well, won't it just decompose there? And it's like, yes, but without air. And then we have that different chemical breakdown giving off methane. So we need volume for temperature. We need to turn the materials for air. And then we need moisture. So this moisture can come naturally, especially if you're composting food waste. It tends to be pretty wet. Sometimes you need to water your pile. Oftentimes, our compost bins are outside. And so depending on the type of bin you have, it may be just getting natural rainwater or snow. But it's something to keep in mind. We don't want things to be too wet or our microorganisms will drown out. But we need them to stay somewhat moisture so that they can utilize that. And then the microorganisms themselves. Really, this is what it's all about. They are doing all the work. We're just kind of helping we're facilitating the decomposition process to move a little bit faster. And then, so before I go on with the backyard, with how to set up your own backyard composting, I just want to touch on this because I think this is where there's a lot of confusion around how to compost and what's compostable. And really, it's because when we are talking about backyard composting, we're talking about a small scale. You know, it's just you, maybe it's you and your neighbors, but it's a pretty small scale. When we talk about commercial composting, it's huge operations that allow for much more to be accepted because temperatures can get much higher. So commercial operations here in the US, they need to reach 141 degrees to 160 degree over a 2-week period of time to meet a process to reduce further pathogens. So if commercial piles aren't reaching this, they'll get shut down. Because these piles get so hot, they can take more things like compostable ware. You may see more compostable bags and plates and cutlery available. That stuff is typically taken at a commercial pile. Also, dairy, meats, manure, animal products, also accepted at commercial piles. When we talk about our home piles, I will cover in a few slides specifically things that we do recommend and not recommend putting in your backyard pile, but it's much more limited because you have a smaller pile, you have smaller amount of material, the temperatures are lower, so things aren't breaking down as fast, and also pathogens aren't being removed. So again, that high temperature over a 2-week period of time is going to remove any dangerous pathogens from the finished compost product, where that might not be happening in your backyard. So you may not want to add those pathogens into your pile by adding dairy or meat. So I just wanted to point that out because I do think that's kind of where confusion stems around composting. And it's important to understand that backyard composting is a little bit different than commercial composting. And so again, before you kind of really get into it at your house, you have to decide how are you going to process your compost? Is this something where you really don't have much time to dedicate to it, but you just want to do it? You want to take those organics out of your trash and compost them. You would consider add as you go pile. It's much easier because you just are simply adding material as you go. However, it's a slower process. You can get finished compost anywhere between 4 to 12 months if you get any at all. And it's minimal effort. However, if you're like, I really want to have a bunch of compost to use in my garden this season, you could consider batch processing instead. It's a much faster process where you between 2 to 4 months, depending on how much you're managing it. And because you're gonna batch process, which means add all the material at once, so you'll have a large amount of material all at once to create a larger pile or fill your bin. It will help again with that temperature increase, so you'll get a faster process. So these are your two options. I always like to tell people, just assess how much time do you have to be doing this batch processing. While the compost gets made quicker, you do have to monitor it a little bit more because it will start actively composting right away. And also you need to be able to stockpile material to create a batch process. So you would need to house a bunch of fall leaves or something and house a bunch of food waste or other green waste to make a large pile all at once. So some people don't really have space or time to do that. So deciding which one works best for you, and then just testing it out. Home composting is an experiment, and there's no right or wrong way. There's just different ways.
Tiffany, can I just chime in here for a minute?
Yeah, of
There
course.
is Tiffany is talking about kind of like the two extremes. You could essentially create a batch process if you take your neighbor's jack-o'-lanterns, and essentially get a whole bunch at once. Anything like that, when you're really getting a lot of stuff going, is going to create that batch processing, even if you have like a quote add as you go pile.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you can, mix and match and and process as the material becomes available. Maybe you're adding as you go over the winter, and then in the summer you have a lot more, you're eating a lot more fruits and vegetables, you have a lot more yard waste, and all of a sudden you've went from a slow add process to a batch processing. So many ways to mix and match it. And so let's get ready to compost in your yard. Step one would be to determine where are you going to do this. So you want to not have your compost bin or pile set up right next to your house. Particularly if anything goes awry, you really don't want that to be like right next to your front door. But you don't want it to be too far away because you want to be able to have it easily accessible, that you're going to go out there and add to it on a regular basis and manage it. So finding the right location on your property that works for you. Something to consider is it would be nice if it was an area that was partially shaded, especially when using closed bins like the one you see here. And Haverford Township does require closed bin system. So with the closed bin system, it can heat up faster because it's in this like black plastic. So the sun will attract and it will get hotter quicker, which is great for our microbes, but also because they're normally covered, they're not getting as much natural moisture in, and the sun can dry things out. So partially shaded is good, but not required. Again, if you don't have a partially shaded area, no big deal. You might just have to water your pile a little bit more. And then that's the other thing, is having a water source nearby. So if you have a hose that's easily available, awesome. If not, you know, understanding that you may have to like take a watering can or a pitcher out there with some water. So just taking these things into consideration as you determine the location of your compost pile. And then the second step would be to choose your bin. So like I said, Haverford Township, you need to have a closed bin system. So whether you choose the standing upright closed bin or a tumbler, either would work. Both of these are great compost options, and you can find these most places. And then Haverford Township also provides a closed bin at a reduced rate, which I have some information on the next slide. But one thing to note here is both of these options, you know, because they're closed and they're sealed, they're both great at mitigating pests a little bit more. They both sometimes need a little bit more monitoring on the moisture, like I just mentioned. And tumblers specifically, you may want to consider having two at once, or because at some point you need to stop adding material so that everything can turn into compost and decompose. So at some point you need to stop utilizing it and let it do its thing anywhere between 6 to 8 to 10 weeks. So some people typically have two, so that as one is kind of finishing up the composting process, they're adding to another one. So just something to consider with tumblers. Again, not required. You can always store that material somewhere, and then once the material inside is decomposed enough, you can take it out and start again. And like I said, Haverford Township subsidized these compost bins, which is great. And they also provide a wire mesh for rodent resistance. So that is definitely something we recommend to any home composter. I'll talk about that a little bit later in like terms of setting up your pile and getting all the materials you need ready. But we definitely recommend that because that's not a problem that you want to be dealing with when it comes to home composting. All right, preparing for your pile, like I said, the rodent resistant mesh. Whether you get it through the township or another place, really important. And it needs to be this rodent resistant mesh. It can't just be like chicken wire, because particularly rodents like rats can just bite right through that. So you want it to be the rodent resistant mesh. And you want to lay that down at the base of your bin, and then put some finished compost or soil on top of it. And then if you're using a tumbler, you would just add in some finished compost or soil. And what that does is it kind of kickstarts our microbes. So if we're starting with a good dose of compost, it's already crawling with great microbes. So we want to start the pile with that and then add to it. Other things you need to do to prepare to compost is to keep your brown materials handy. I'll cover in more detail what our browns and greens are. But things like fall leaves are great to stockpile up on in the fall, especially in this Pennsylvania area where we have that in abundance. So you want to have brown materials ready. Other things could be shredded newspaper, sawdust, cardboard, brown bags. Those things all would be carbon heavy materials that we need to have a good. We need to have some available every time we add to the compost system. And then again, just mentioning again about the watering, knowing if you're gonna like need to have your hose nearby or a watering can. Tools you can get if if you have a pitchfork, a garden hose, or a shovel, you can turn your pile with those tools. There are specific compost aerators, looks like a big corkscrew that you can purchase. Does make it in the clothespins a little bit easier just because they can be a little narrow at the top, but it's not required. You can definitely get by with an item that you maybe already own. Other things people get are compost thermometers. I don't think that's crazy necessary for home composting since piles aren't getting as hot. But if you want to keep track and that's interesting to you, how hot is it getting? You can feel free to get a compost thermometer. It just has a longer stem so that you can get into the middle of the pile to take the measurement from the inside. And then what should you feed your compost? So here, like I said, is our recommendations for things to put in specific home compost piles. So you can see we've got our browns and our greens, and what that means is our green material is nitrogen rich and our brown material is carbon rich. And we need a good ratio of both nitrogen and carbon to have this composting process happen properly. Do want to note that all of these materials have both carbon and nitrogen in them. It's just which one is more prominent is what category they fall into. So for our green material, we've got our food waste, fruits, vegetables, seeds, nuts, coffee grounds, tea bags. Tea bags, you want to be careful, make sure that they're the natural kind and there's no staple there. And our lawn and flower clippings. Brown materials that are great for your backyard pile are, like I said, fall leaves, pine needles, shredded paper, and newspaper. You definitely don't want to add anything that's waxed. You would normally be able to tell if there's like a wax film on the paper by touching it. Cardboard, egg cartons, sawdust, pencil shavings, dryer lint. Some people don't like to add that because a lot of clothes are not made out of pure cotton anymore, so there's sometimes microplastics and synthetics in there that people don't want going into their compost pile. So we have that listed, but you can decide whether or not you want to add that or not. And then another thing that people don't always think about is hair and nail clippings are great for compost, and we create that on a regular basis. So those are things that are great and a full yes for composting at home. You can see we have some stuff listed as maybe. Again, composting at home is an experiment. If you eat a lot of these things or have a lot of this and you really would like to try adding it into your pile, go for it. See how it goes. The reason that these are listed as maybe is because these things can either throw off your pile dynamic or attract or are more attractive to pests and insects. So citrus and banana peels, they have a thicker rind, so they're just harder to break down and they're sweet, so they're really attractive to flies, which aren't bad for compost, but sometimes not. You don't want too many going on just for, it's not great to have too many flies around. And then cooked foods. So cooked foods, we're normally cooking in oil or butter. And again, that type of material is gonna attract rodents more than just your regular fruit and vegetables. Other things are on the carbon side are fireplace ash. So that is a maybe, more so because when you add fireplace ash, you should really just be sprinkling it in a little bit at a time. Can really affect the pH of your pile, which can kill off some microbes. So if you do have fireplace ash, I have it under the maybe, but it's more so add with caution, sprinkle it in a little bit at a time, so that you don't overload your pile with it all at once. Eggshells are more carbon heavy, and they are a great add for compost, but sometimes they can again, the tougher shell, it may not break down. If you don't mind seeing some residue of eggshell left over in your finished compost, go for adding it. If that's not something that's interesting to you, then I wouldn't add them because it's unlikely that they'll break down all the way. And then another thing is straw. Straw has like, it's kind of woody, and again, just a little bit harder to break down. So that's why I have it in the maybe section. Things that we definitely don't recommend in home compost piles are any sort of animal product, dairy, fish, shellfish, meat, poultry. Not recommended. It will attract rodents and can aid to more smells. And especially because piles, like I said, aren't getting hot enough, those things come with a different set of pathogens that you may not want to be spreading in your garden during the spring. Other things is weeds. So again, when we're not getting the piles hot enough, the weed seeds might not die off in your home compost system. And so you could be getting a compost and then spreading the weeds that you composted into the soil for the next year. Not saying that that always happens, but it's something to be mindful of. I always tell people if they have a lot of weeds in their yard, just start a separate compost pile with just like weeds and diseased plants, and then it can still be breaking down and turning into soil, but you wouldn't be using that to in all of your raised beds or where you're planting your food for next year. Other things not recommended are corn stalks and branches. Again, just because those are really thick, it can take a really long time for that stuff to break down, especially if it's not at super high temperature. So things to consider. This is kind of our general list of yays and nays. But again, if you have something that you want to test it out, do it in a small batch. Add it and see how it goes. Like compostable ware, like, a lot of people can get that. You go out to eat, they give it to you in a compostable container. It's often going to be, if you're eating something that has any dairy, fish, or meat in it, it will have that residue on it, but you can always rip it up and see how it goes in your home compost pile. And then next you want to add all these materials to your pile. And I have some suggestions on adding materials. One is to break items up, especially like denser and more woody items. So what would be a good example? Broccoli. If you have a broccoli, you cut the broccoli florets off, and then you just have this large broccoli stalk that you want to add into your compost. That's awesome. Perhaps just chop it up before adding it in there. That one already starts breaking it down. If you're chopping it up, it's already being broken down into smaller pieces. And it also creates more surface area for our microbes to go on and start eating away at the items. The other thing that's most important is having a correct carbon to nitrogen ratio. So this is the brown to green ratio. For every 1 part green material, you want 2 to 3 parts brown material. For home composting, I always err on the side of like closer to 1 to 3 than 1 to 2. However, if you're doing batch processing, it can be closer to 1 to 1 or 1 to 2 because things will break down a little bit quicker. And then always, always, always cover your pile with a layer of brown materials. This is important for multiple reasons. It kind of acts as a biofilter to keep odors in, but also if your pile is exposed to the outdoor elements, it can help wick up extra moisture. And it also creates a barrier between like fresh food waste and the like out in the open, so it will deter insects and pests that you don't want coming to your pile. So that is important. All right. And then we have to turn our compost pile. So again, we need to let the airflow get through and move things around, make sure everything is mixed properly. So we need to turn our pile, is what people call it. Again, you can use a compost aerator, you can use a shovel or a pitchfork. Any of those things will work. If you have a tumbler, they typically just have a hand crank that you turn and it does it itself. But I want to take a moment to talk about like ambient outdoor temperatures here. especially in the climate we live in, especially like right now when it's really cold. I do have a whole slide on winterizing your compost piles since we're in that time of the year right now. But outdoor temperatures, if it's 55 degrees or warmer out, turning your pile regularly, maybe daily, maybe every other day, that's great. It's going to get lots of oxygen and airflow in there. As it gets colder, you want to turn it less frequently, and this is for two reasons. The more you turn your pile, all the heat kind of stays in the middle of the pile. So if you turn your pile, it's going to immediately decrease in temperature until the microbes start working away, and it will increase in temperature again. So the colder it gets, you want to turn a little bit less frequently to try and keep the pile warmer. And then the other thing is that if once it gets to freezing, materials are going to freeze. If the pile's not staying hot enough, the materials will freeze, and it just becomes very laborious to be turning around frozen materials. So the colder it gets, the less turning is necessary. And I'll talk a little bit more about the freezing of the pile in a minute here. But other reasons to turn or other things about turning is, when you add more new material, just give it a little mix. You don't have to do a full turn, but you can just mix things in pretty well, because the more you mix your materials together, the more likely everything is going to have a more consistent airflow ratio and moisture ratio. So you just want to be turning it more regularly. So you don't have to do anything too crazy, but if you're adding things in, you might as well give it a little toss.
Tiffany,
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, for the turning for the daily, would you say that's kind of like the maximum to turn daily when it's warmer? That if you have a lazy compost, a person who's lazy like me for my home piles, I may turn it. I just turn it when I add stuff. Like it just would go slower. So the more you turn up to once a day when it's warm, the faster your pile will go. But if you didn't want to turn as often, you just have a slower pile. Is that correct?
Yeah, that can definitely be correct. But the one thing, like I mentioned, when you turn your pile, the temperature is going to decrease immediately. So, if you turn too often, things aren't going to get hot enough. So it's kind of finding the right ratio. And again, it really depends on how much material you're adding and where it's located. But yeah, I wouldn't be turning it any more than a day, because that would definitely be too much. I would say between every 3 to 4 days would be an ideal place for a home composter. All right, so the 3 phases of composting. So again, this is pretty high level. You're likely not going to get to these temperatures at your home pile, but because you're interested in composting and you're going to be doing it, I think it's important to understand these 3 phases of the composting system. So phase 1 is the mesophilic. It's named after the mesophilic bacteria that is most present during this phase. It's from anywhere between 0 to 115 degrees Fahrenheit. And basically the temperatures are accelerating here. I'll show you on the next page. There's a graphic. But temperatures are kind of rising due to bacteria breaking down sugar during this phase. Then we move to phase 2, where thermophilic bacteria is more present because it's hotter, between 120 and 170 degrees Fahrenheit. This is considered our active composting. The bacteria is breaking down more so proteins and fat at this time. And then fungi and actinomycetes are eating away at complex carbs and proteins. And then we have our last phase of composting, which is known as curing, where we let the pile mature. And in doing that, we want to make sure that the temperature one goes down. You would not want to be putting 120-degree compost directly into your garden. It would obviously hurt any plants that were existing there. So the curing phase allows for temperatures to decrease, and it also allows for the microbial activity to decrease. Why the microbes are super important and good for our soils. Too much activity can really overwhelm plants, especially if they're existing plants that you're adding compost to or brand new seeds. It can sometimes cause more damage than good. So we need to cure the compost before we use it. And so this is just a quick visual of that. Again, during phase 1, temperatures are accelerating. During phase 2, active composting. And this shows, sanitation and seed killing with those high temperatures. And then phase 3, curing maturation so that we can use the finished product. So back to winterizing the product or the pile. I talked about infrequent turning because of colder temperatures. So again, we want to keep most of the heat in the pile, so turning less. And then also, once it gets to freezing, if your pile does freeze, it's okay to let your pile go dormant. Like, you don't have to be out there turning frozen materials. You can just let it be frozen, and you can still add to it, and again, always covering with the brown material. And then once it gets warmer out, your pile will start to thaw and it will just start composting again. If your pile freezes and goes dormant, it will just reactivate as the temperature increases. But if you want to keep your pile going all winter long and keep it hot, things you can do are to insulate. And you can do that by bulking up the brown material. So again, increasing that browns to green ratio, adding more browns material will just generally increase the volume, but it will also help to allow for more airflow without turning the pile. So our browns material typically are drier goods, so it will wick up moisture to continually allow airflow, but also they have a little bit more structure to them. So again, they can allow for more airspace through the pile without turning, while also adding volume, which will help add temperature to the pile. So if you are composting over the winter and you want to keep it nice and toasty, those are the things I suggest, and perhaps even considering a batch process where, again, it will just happen quickly all at once, and you'll have more volume to keep the temperatures up. And then as you compost, you may run into some issues. This is often what deters people from composting, but I just want to say, if you are putting an effort and managing your pile, you shouldn't really run into these issues. And if you do, you will hopefully now, I'm going to tell you in a second, understand what's happening and know how to fix and adjust. If the composting process is happening properly, you shouldn't have any smells. You shouldn't have any crazy bugs or pests, because the material will be breaking down, and they won't be interested. So if you're finding that your pile is smelly, often what that means is that there's just a high nitrogen content. That nitrogen material is what smells. So what you would want to do is add more brown materials and really turn the pile, really mix those materials together. And again, if you're finding your pile is smelling, you may want to add a larger brown layer over top of your pile every single time you add to it. So just acting as that biofilter again to keep smells down and covered. If you're finding that your pile doesn't really look like it's doing anything and you don't think that things are really breaking down, one, it could just be that temperatures are really low, you don't have enough volume. But another thing that can happen is that you may need to increase your moisture content. So oftentimes if you add too many browns, but you're not monitoring that moisture content, it's just not going to break down very quickly. So adding water, if you think things aren't really moving along quickly, you would want your pile materials to be the consistency of a wrung out sponge. So too much water, microbes are going to drown out. Not enough water, the microbes are going to die off because they're thirsty, and they and so nothing's really going to break down. If you're finding that there's a lot of bugs happening in your compost pile, just remember that bugs are pretty much a normal part of the composting process. Worms are very good for your compost. They're going to help with the decomposition. Nematodes, spiders, like all those things, very normal to see in your compost. I mentioned about flies earlier. They are also normal to see in your compost, but they are not preferred. Us humans, don't really love flies swarming around. So ways to make sure that you deter flies is, again, that having a good brown layer over your pile will deter them because it will be covered. Flies aren't super hyped to go sit on a bed of straw. They're like looking for the food waste. So making sure all food and green waste is extremely covered and pushed into the middle of your pile will help deter any flies if you're having those kinds of issues. Additionally, this is another reason why we don't recommend animal and meat products, because that will also attract flies. And then lastly, if you feel like you're not getting a finished compost product from your pile, this is again often typical with tumblers for the reasons I mentioned, where you at some point need to stop adding material. And that can happen in a bin too. So if you feel like you're never really getting a finished product, like it looks broken down, but there's always like pieces of food in there, you may want to just stop adding to it and let it decompose for a little bit longer by itself. So those are the typical issues that we see with composting. And if you notice that they're happening, one, know that it's normal, and two, hopefully you can now feel confident in like adjusting your pile. And again, like I'll keep mentioning, it's just an experiment. If something is going awry, you can do something different and it will likely change the outcome. Whether it fixes the problem, sometimes it creates a new problem, but overall, you'll still be having decomposition and you'll be diverting your waste. So it's great. And then when you do get your finished compost, it's like, what do you do with it? So compost is awesome and all plants love it. So most, especially in this area of Pennsylvania, you're going to be using compost in the spring to get garden beds ready for spring and summer plantings. You could do a mid-season side dressing. So if plants are growing and then it comes to the summer, and say it's a tomato plant and you want it to keep growing, you can side dress the plant with compost, which means just adding a small layer around the root system so that it can kind of get a dose of vitamins and nutrients. You can compost your lawns and beds before the fall frost. And this is good, especially in this area where we get a lot of precipitation over the winter, for just generally creating better soil and getting more absorption in our land rather than runoff when we get increased precipitation. You can make a compost tea and apply it to your plants at any time to give them a dose of nutrients. And during the winter time, we're not really gardening outside because it's cold. However, you could add compost to your houseplants and give them a good dose of nutrients. Something I do every winter and my plants love it. So that's something you could do if you are looking to utilize compost over the winter. And like I said, all plants like compost. You can put it on the food that you're growing. You can put it on flowers, shrubs, bushes. All anything that grows can benefit from compost. All right. So I think there's some things in the chat I'll pull up to see if I can answer any questions. And if there are any more specific questions, I'm happy to answer them for you. So let me see about the chat. Oh, maybe that was just you, Joy, talking about the compost bin. Let's see.
I'm just gonna add a couple things because I've started piles several or in bins several times, and when you're first starting your compost pile going, that's the hardest time, and I find the most time that you need to add water, because just as Tiffany said, compost, the finished compost, which once your pile is going will be, closer and closer to that, absorbs the moisture. But just a pile of leaves by itself doesn't hold on to that moisture well. So when it's just getting started up, I find to keep that, to get it going, I often have to keep on adding water to it. But otherwise, and then in the height of summer, sometimes I have to add the water to it. But and then one of the things, the bin for the township and a lot of the upright bins, it suggests adding a layer of sticks to the bottom. And Tiffany, I don't know your experience with this, and I think they suggest that so you can have aeration. But what the first time then that you're going to get finished compost out of that bin, the sticks are going to be in your way. So I would use sticks with caution. I would opt to just try to stir your bin more rather than adding those sticks at the bottom. That's just, it's a pain to have to like dig the sticks out when you're trying to get the finished compost out.
Yeah, I would also agree with that, Joy. Yeah, I would recommend putting sticks at the bottom. Because also depending on what you're using to turn it, they can get in the way too. Because the bins, they're kind of small, which is the point because you're composting in your yard. But yeah, if you were using a compost area, they would just get like right in the way. And they would yeah, be hard. Yeah, so I would also recommend just turning the compost more to get more aeration rather than adding in big things like sticks and branches. And then I see in the chat, Maria, you asked a question about stockpiling the brown material and how to know when you have enough. And that really, again, just depends on how much green material you're going to be composting. So I typically tell people if they have an extra trash can, or if it's just bags, to stockpile their browns somewhere where it can be covered and not get wet. Because again, the other thing about these brown materials is that we want them to be wicking up the moisture in the piles, so that it's creating airflow and keeping that balance. So storing them, first of all, somewhere where they can be sealed and covered so that they're not getting super wet, or even just outside next to your pile under like a tarp or something. And then how do you know when there's enough? So depends if you're someone who's maybe going to use like a countertop kitchen bin to collect your food waste, you would then, add one full of those and then two full of those of the brown material. So again, it might take a little bit at first to understand how much you're going to be adding to your pile on a regular basis, but then just always making sure you have double that. So hopefully that helps. I don't have there's no set number of you need this many pounds of brown material handy. You just want to have a good stockpile.
I can chime in about what I have a family of 4 and we use a lot of fruits and vegetables. And for my brown materials, I use shredded leaves. And if you haven't shredded leaves before, it's incredible the amount that of compaction that happens. So for my family of 4, I go through 2 35-gallon cans of shredded leaves a year for my browns.
Awesome. Cool. And then I saw that you also asked a question about the bad organisms that can develop in a pile, and how the high temperatures help mitigate that. So is that something to worry about in backyard composting? Yes and no. Again, it kind of goes back to what you're adding to the pile. This is why we don't recommend meat and dairy and animal products, because those bad pathogens tend to be created with that type of material, and the weeds, so that's those would be things, if you're avoiding adding that to your pile, you shouldn't have them existing in the pile. So it's not something to worry about home composting if you're just keeping in mind in what you're adding to your pile. If you do decide to add those things to your pile, they may die off in the compost process. It's not as guaranteed as in the commercial process when things are getting really hot. But you could just see how it goes. So Brian, you asked to clarify, are you supposed to wet the compost bin before you add the brown material? So this is again one of those things you'll have to kind of test out, but if you're adding a lot of food waste that's very wet, you may not have to water the bin before, you may not have to water your materials before you add the browns. If it's middle of summer and we're going through a heat wave and there's no rain coming at all, it might be a good idea to be watering your materials slightly every time you're adding, just to keep that moisture content going, because when it's super hot and those plastic bins, you know, they're just gonna trap heat, it will dry things out. So it's not something you have to do every time. Joy, did you have something?
Yeah, I just want to say somebody that I talked to in the community said what they do is when they take out their countertop bin to dump, they just fill the interstitial areas with water. So it's just a one-step process that they put the stuff in. What I was talking about was when you're really starting up the pile, like you don't have much going on. And I would argue that if you haven't started composting yet and you're picking up your bin next week, you will be creating a lasagna that you're going to be ready of greens and browns that that's going to be frozen, and then once it's going to be warm again, it's going to start. Because if you don't already have those microorganisms going and in your pile, you're just going to be waiting for spring, but that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, like I said, piles can go dormant. They'll just freeze, and you won't have any of these any like pest or bug issues because everything will be frozen, and then they'll just naturally start thawing, and the microorganisms will naturally just occur and appear, and the breakdown will start happening.
I have one other thing to add. If you haven't collected leaves, they will still appear, and in the spring, some of the landscaping companies will still be doing cleanups that you can ask for the leaves from them. But also on an ongoing basis, there is a cabinet company that has untreated wood shavings and sawdust in Philadelphia that is always looking for people to take for composting. That's how they reduce their waste, is to offer that sawdust for people to compost. So if you email Have Compost right now, you'll get me on the other side of that. If you request a bin, I will have that information in about where to get those wood chips and sawdust. I do want to point out that in Havre Township, per our composting ordinance, you're not allowed to put in any meat or animal waste into the bins. We have a lot of things that are compostable that we can reduce. We don't need to take chances with those two things.
All right, Lindsay, I see you asked any tips or recommendations for countertop scrap collectors. So I feel like the most popular ones are like the metal bins, and they have like a charcoal filter at the top. Those are great. I have one myself. But honestly, like, you don't have to buy anything new. It can be a bowl. It could be a Tupperware, like an old Tupperware. I think Tupperware works great for collecting scraps in your kitchen because it fully seals. The metal bins have the charcoal filter, which is nice, but it's not a full seal. Um, so sometimes fruit flies can be happening, which is not awesome. So I always tell people a fully sealed countertop bin is awesome, and then you can just empty it, big or small as you want it to be, however much space you have in your space. And that would be my recommendation. So they have the traditional ones that like look really cute. But if you're concerned at all about fruit flies or smells, if you have a sensitive nose, I would suggest getting a bin that is fully sealed, whether it's specifically for compost, like kitchen composting, or just like a regular Tupperware that has a lid.
I want to, since I've been composting for, oh gosh, probably over 16 years now, I've tried a couple of different options and seen things. So I started with like a bin that had like a liner, like a plastic, it was like, it had air that could go to a plastic liner, and that plastic liner was supposed to be compostable. Well, that was a problem in two different ways. One, when I got too much, when I didn't empty it fast enough, it started composting like in my cabinet or on my counter and dissolved that plastic. And the other thing is the finished product, the plastic didn't always go away. So, and I also do metal collection, and I did get somebody's compost container that wasn't stainless steel. It was painted, and that's started to rust over time. So I think if you could just do it right, if you want the metal with the carbon, which I personally love, get the stainless steel one so you don't have to worry about ever getting another one. I do see a question on, does Haverford have a community compost program for the disposing of the excess branches and brush? So we have essentially 3 ongoing composting programs in Haverford Township that do not involve food. One is the brush pickup. So the brush pickup, that goes to a local company that makes wood mulch. So in order to make wood mulch, it's slightly composted, right? So because you don't see it's a little bit of kind of dirt and wood in there. So that's the first. Christmas trees are chipped and used on in our trails. And the third one is our leaves. So our leaves get collected, and then they go to one of the 2 commercial composting facilities in the Philadelphia area. So so although currently we don't have a curbside food pickup, we do actually have composting programs ongoing in our waste stream. Ideally, I would love to see a curbside collection of food waste as part of our trash fees. We do have a consultant actually looking into that currently, that is funded through a USDA grant. Also funded through the grant is the incentive program. If backyard composting is not for you or for somebody that you know, but they're interested in composting, a way to do it is to use a company such as Mother Compost that does the curbside collection and then takes it to a composting facility. By far, backyard composting is like the gold standard for environmental, just because you use the stuff in-house, you don't have any transportation stuff, and then you are collecting, I mean, I have a neighborhood compost bin as well as my own family's. So I use a lot of leaves. So instead of those leaves being taken by the township and composted, which is great, I use it right in house. So it's just less transportation. But we, composting is commercially is absolutely the second best option of doing composting, and much better than having it picked up in our trash. So the program that's available is right now is 2 free months of composting for Haverford Township residents or of the composting service, but you need to be a new subscriber. And you can do that. We have 2 companies that are currently registered with the township to do this. Mother Compost is one, and the other one is Easy Composting. And through both, just you're automatically put into the system if you go to their website and sign up. I know there are some of people I know do backyard composting during the spring and summer, and hire a service during the winter. I've never found a problem with doing it through the winter, even though it goes slower. I just it just happens. I try to keep my bins pretty full, my upright bins, and I say I have bins because I run a neighborhood composting, and I mean, even just the other day, as seeds were sprouting, I mean, because it was still, there was enough in there to keep warm. And a good way of getting more mass is during October, and get your neighbors' jack-o'-lanterns. And it's amazing. It's like superfood for your compost. And also, like, some of my neighbors had like fallen fruit from their like fruit trees. That's like supercharges the compost bin too. If that stuff has already started to be chewed away at. So there's lots of ways to bulk up your bin, so you can just keep the composting process going faster. It's really counterintuitive in the way the more you add, the faster it will go. You think you have to conserve, but it's really the opposite with composting. Any other questions? If you just want to unmute, anybody can talk, or I don't know what time we're at here. And we're right at 8, so if I will put in again, if you're interested in getting a subsidized bin, all you have to do is, now that you've gone through the program, is to email hivecompost@gmail.com, and I'll send you the instructions about how to pick up the bin. Thank you all. Thank you, Tiffany.
Yeah, thank you guys. Happy composting.